For this video, I'm going to talk about documentation, specifically MLA documentation. Some students might know that in order to ensure you don't end up plagiarizing something, you have to document where your information comes from and give that credit so that you're not misrepresenting something as your own. So keep in mind that plagiarism is not just taking something off the internet, putting it on your paper, and turning it in. Plagiarism is also documenting something incorrectly on your paper and turning it in. So the documentation has to be done right in order for you to not plagiarize. There are a lot of rules to documentation, which is why it can be difficult. So it's always a good idea to get your documentation checked by an instructor or a tutor, and you have to allow some time in the process of doing your assignments to get that check in. Otherwise, you're running the risk of not doing documentation correctly and then possibly losing points or even getting a 0 on an assignment because you inadvertently plagiarized. Now, when it comes to doing your documentation, I do have some notes in the course. So if we go to the course content and scroll down, there's going to be a research notes folder. And in there is also this MLA and APA. So we're doing MLA for the humanities paper. When we get to the sciences paper, we'll be switching to APA, which is a slightly different form of documentation. But we're learning MLA first because it has less rules than APA. And so typically, if you know MLA, it's easier to learn APA later. So in the MLA folder, here are some examples. Basically, here's the in-text, which we're going to talk about. There's a sample paper if you want to see what a fully developed MLA paper might look like. And then this is the MLA 9th edition documentation. When you're doing documentation, obviously first you have to have your expert sources, which I talked about in the research video. And then once you have those sources, any source that you actually use in your paper is what has to be documented. If you look at 5 different websites, but only actually use one of them in your paper, you do not document all 5 you looked at. You only document the one you actually put into your paper. And once you have that information in your paper, you then have to document it. Now, there are 2 guides in here. This one is for what's called the works cited page at the very end of your document. And then the other one, which is the in-text, is for how you do the in-text citations inside of your writing. So, just to clarify the example, if I look at that sample paper, for instance, citation comes in 2 parts. If we go into the paper, you can see here in this paragraph, they have these notes, Johnson 12, which indicates the sources by Johnson, page 12. These are the in-text citations, and these in-text citations have to match something on this works cited page at the end. So here's that Johnson source. So it comes from this book, MLA for College Freshmen. Now, I'm going to switch my screen a little bit and do some examples and some typing. So let's say, for instance, and just to reiterate, if you are writing something into your paper, right? Let's say you're writing your paragraph, and you know that when you put information into the paragraph, into your paper, you have 2 options, right? You can quote word for word something that you read, and then you have to put someone's last name, for instance, maybe a page number like Johnson 12, and then a period at the end. Okay, that's one way to document in MLA. The other way is to paraphrase what you read in your own words and then document it. So there are 2 things, two methods here that we're looking at. One is a word for word quote. You haven't changed what you read at all, which is why you put the quotation marks around it. It's word for word exactly the same as you found it. And then the other method is to take that thing that you read and rephrase it in your own language and then document it. Of the 2, this is the superior one. It is always better to paraphrase what you read into your own words. You should try not to quote ever, unless it is absolutely necessary, in which case it's numbers, statistics, things that cannot be rephrased whatsoever. But the more quotes you have in your paper, the weaker your paper becomes, because If you quote again and again and again, you are no longer writing your own paper. You are copying your paper from someplace else. So you always want to paraphrase what you read into your own words and then note where you got this idea from. This will ensure that you are completely writing your own paper and you're not just copying ideas word for word from various sources. So remember, always strive to do this for the best grade for your paper. Another way that you can document, if you are not, for instance, using or comfortable using these, or sometimes you want to vary up your documentation a little bit. But let's say, for instance, I don't want to use an in-text citation like this in my next example because it would be unclear when you read it. You can also write credit into the sentence. So I can say things like, according to Johnson, comma, and then the paraphrase content into my own words like this. Okay. So if you write it, for instance, like that, make that a little bit smaller. There we go. I have said where I got this from. Just like if I would have done it right here. So because I told you where I got it from, I don't have to do the citation at the end of this. I've already told you where it came from. So these are all different methods that are acceptable to use. Sometimes you'll use one, sometimes the other, sometimes you might mix and match. It just depends on what would be clearer for the reader. The important thing is it should always be clear for the reader of your paper where you are using your sources and when you are using them from start to finish. Now, when you are at this stage and you've got your research together, you've done your research, you've got your websites or your database sources, and you're ready to start writing, before you can do this part here, you have to do the works cited page, that page at the bottom. So the first step, really, for documentation, once I've got the sources I've decided I'm going to use, is I need to make this page and write out my sources. And the reason you have to do this one first is because whatever is on this page will determine what goes inside the citations. I don't know what goes in here until I have this full form written out so I can decide what it's going to match up top. So you always make this page first. And the way you do this, each one of these depends on the type of source you use. There's a different style that it can vary slightly from source to source, but this can look different if it's a database source versus a website versus an ebook versus a video versus a blog versus an email. Every single type of source has its own slight difference in documentation from one to the other. So the first thing you have to do is know what kind of source am I using, and then look for the format of that type of source, which is why we have the guides available. So if I go here into my 9th edition, right here in my research notes, it's set up by type of source. Like if you have a book, and that would be a paper book with one author, then you would follow this format. Notice that when you're following the format, you have to be careful with the punctuation because I highlighted it for you. Like this should be a comma, and then this here has to be a period. This title of the book should be in italics with a period, the publisher, a comma, and the year, for instance. Some students will use citation generators. That's okay to get started, but even if you use a citation generator, you should cross-check it with the guide because 80% of the time, whenever a student uses a citation generator, it comes out wrong. Almost every time I've checked a paper, I can tell the student used the citation generator because it isn't right. So don't trust that those come out correctly. A lot of times they don't. It's a good way to get started on creating documentation, but you better check and see what's missing because usually something is missing from the format or the citation generator is outdated. It's using like the 7th edition instead of the new 9th edition, and therefore things come out wrong. So it's good to have a citation guide like this. If you want to download it, you can, and just have a copy on your computer. and it tells you how to do documentation for all different types of things, like an ebook, for instance. There's the database source, although the database source, the database usually does those for you, like I mentioned in the research video. Here's one students will use a lot: websites with an author, without an author. What if there is no author on the website? Also, please keep in mind that the way you create these tells your instructor what you used. So for instance, if you document a database source like it's a website, you're not going to get credit for using a database source because a database source documentation looks different than a website one. And so when I look at it, I see a website. But if it was actually a database and you had to use a database for your assignment, then you've got a problem. You're not going to get credit for having completed the assignment. So you want to make sure that the style you use is correct, because the style tells the reader what type of source it was. Now, let's just do a couple of examples, and then we'll also talk about the in-text citations, those little marks that I've got right here. Okay, these guys. So first thing we do is we make our works cited page, right? Now, first of all, just as a reminder, if you are in the database, they do those for you. So remember, that's why I recommended the database in the other video, that if I have this source that I found in the database, remember it gives me the citation for it. I can copy this and then put it here onto my document when I want to use it. So I can have my work cited. Just be careful when you copy paste. Sometimes the italics will disappear and you have to put them back. So cross check it. But as I look at these two sources, I can tell you this one is a website. This one's a database source. First of all, this is a .com. This one here has a DOI instead. So I know that's a database. That's an article at this point. This one has an article name and then the name of the website. This one here has the name of a journal. Notice this one has volume and issue numbers, plus a year and also pages within the large journal that this particular article appeared on. So there are little differences that tell me that this is a website, this is a database source. Now, if you're using the database source, like I said, you can copy paste the one that is made for you. That makes it simple. If you're using a website, then you need to follow the format on that other document. Now, one thing that the document isn't always entirely clear about is how to handle authors. So I'm just going to kind of give you a little instruction on that. So let's say I have a website, right, with one author. That would be this one here. So when I start my source, based on that format, let me grab that format actually really quickly so you can see the full format as it is, you know, without the example in it. Like that, okay? We'll make that a little smaller. There we go. And kind of line it up. Okay. All right. So you begin with the last name, comma, first name of the author. So just like it does here, Hammond, comma, Stephanie. So last name, comma, first name. The title of the article on the website, in this case, was The Reading Brain, etc. The name of the website was So Many Books. Okay. Sponsoring organization, they don't have one, which means it's probably the same as the name of the website. The year the article was published on the web, and then the URL. So as an example, let's take a look at one of those websites I showed you in the research folder or the research video, right? I showed you the Smart History website, which I looked up. I liked because we know that these authors have a background in art, okay? So when I'm doing my documentation, and I'm going to type on my Word document as I'm pointing things out here. I can't show you both screens at the same time, but I will show you the full documentation at the end. So now this one has two authors, right? Instead of just Hammond, comma, Stephanie, I've got Dr. Steven Zucker and Dr. Beth Harris. So how do I do two authors? Well, I still go last name, comma, first name. So it's going to be Zucker, comma, Steven, and then I could put doctor. But then I still need to write the second one. But when you do the second author, you actually just put it in correct first and last name form. So the first one, when you write it, you always go last name, comma, first. But if there's a second author, you just write it as it is, Dr. Beth Harris. Now, after the authors, the next part of the format, according to our guide, was the title of the article. So the title of this article is here, whatever the main idea of this website or this web page is. Arnold Bachlund, Self-Portrait with Death Playing the Fiddle. So that's what this section that I'm using is called, right? So I'm going to put that in quotes because it is in quotes in the example, in the format. So I'm going to type that out and I'm going to show it to you when I'm done. I'm going to also italicize Self-Portrait with Death Playing the Fiddle because that's what they did. I'm going to also copy the capitalized words and keep them capitalized because that's what they did. And there's a period at the end of the article according to the format. The next thing is the name of the website, which should be in italics, which is Smart History. I'm not doing smarthistory.com. Just look at the top of the website, whatever they majorly title it, that's the name of the website. And I'm going to put that in italics. That is going to be followed by the sponsoring organization. So as I scroll down to the bottom, I'm going to look for the copyright. Let's see. Smart History is a nonprofit organization. It looks like there's no C copyright symbol, but they also list Smart History at the bottom, which means they are their own publisher. If I saw a C copyright and then a different name other than Smart History, then I would write that other name that represents their copyright name. But since it's the same as the name at the top, I don't actually have to write it. I can skip the publisher part. After that will come the date and year. So that's a comma after that. And now I need the date. So let's see. Is there a publication date on here? It says, this is the day I accessed it. Here's the date it was published, November 29th, 2015. So I'm going to write that down, November 29th, 2015, comma. Now, if there is no date of publication or last updated on, you would actually skip the date and move on to the next part. Once I have the date, I am then going to grab the URL and I'm going to put that at the end of my citation. So let me show you the finished product right here in my Word document. Here it is. Zucker, comma, Stephen, Dr. and Dr. Beth Harris. In quotes, I have the name of the article. Now keep in mind, these italics are not here because it's the title of the article. On their webpage, they italicize this because that's the name of an artwork, okay? So you're not supposed to put italics in here unless you're copying it, and that's what they did on their webpage. So here I have the name of the article that I read, that web page. On this website, Smart History, in italics, comma, the year of publication I found, comma, and then the URL. And so that's how I'm doing a website. Now, if this website had no author, you would actually simply skip the author section and start with the title of the article, and everything else is still the same in the format, just like it is in the model here. Okay? When I copied this over previously, I think this was not italicized, so I fixed it. But if there's any part of this process that is missing, you just skip it and you do the next one. You just keep on going, okay? So that would be no author, or in this case, two authors. Okay? Now, if there are three or more authors, okay, let's say there was a third doctor in here. There is Dr. Stephen Zucker, Dr. Beth Harris, and Dr. Stephanie Hammond. Well, once there are three or more authors, you actually do an abbreviation. Okay, the rest of this website documentation would be the same. But if there's three or more people listed as the authors, you only list the first author, and then you do this abbreviation, comma, ETAL, period. And that basically means there's three or more total. So some articles can have 20 authors on them. In the database, that is not uncommon. And because of that, if it becomes three or more in MLA, remember we're talking about MLA, not APA, in MLA, you get to do this abbreviation. Now, like I said, how you create this depends on what type of source you're using. So you always refer to the guide, look up in that list what type of source you have, and then you follow the format. Again, it can be very easy to mess these things up, which is why you get it checked. So now that I have my documentation written out, how do I do these little in-text citations? There is a guide back in the research folder like I showed you, but I'm also just going to show you really quickly how to do it. It's super easy. First of all, when I have my sources all done, let's say I've got all these sources, right, that I'm working with. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do, if I've got all these 5 sources, I want to put them in alphabetical order based on the first word. So even though this is the title, it starts with A, Arnold, so that's going to go first. Okay? I'm going to move Frank before Hammond. There we go. And this one has 2 authors, so and Dr. Beth Harris is going to go before et al. All right, so alphabetically, here's where it changes. The A comes before the E. All right, so now I've got my sources in alphabetical order. And let's say I want to do the citations for each one. Now, if you have a source like this, which has no author, the rule is when you're in MLA and you're doing these citations, you start on the left side of your source and you work your way in. Always start with whatever the first word is on the left, which is why I said you have to do these before you do these. Because to know what goes in here, you got to look on the very left side of your citation. The first thing on the left here is actually this quote, this quotation mark, right? So if I'm going to do a citation for this source, then I'm actually going to incorporate that. And I think I'll keep this with me because we want to paraphrase our stuff that we read in our own words, right? And then we're going to start with a quote. And the first word is Arnold. Now, it's the only thing on here that starts with the word Arnold, but Arnold is a first name. And it's really Arnold Bachlin. That's the full phrase. So I'm actually going to put both, Arnold Bachlin. I'm just going to go one more word in. Usually, if you're doing a title like this, you only need 2 or 3 words at the most. But you want to, the rule is you go up to the first noun or noun phrase. Arnold is a noun, but it's Arnold Bachlin. That's kind of the name phrase at the beginning. So I'm just going to keep it together. And then I'm going to end the quote. I don't have to write the whole title. Okay, I don't need all of this. Once I've given you the first 2 or 3 words, the reader sees this, they can go to my works site and they can go, oh, first thing on the left here, it's this source, right? I can tell already. I don't need the whole title. And frankly, you put the whole title in and the citation becomes huge and not very attractive. So all we do is we start on the left so that when someone sees this, they can flip to this page, look straight down the left side, and they could see, oh, Arnold Bachlin. Oh, here it is. Hey, Arnold Bachlin. First thing on the left. Now, when it comes to the page numbers, you only include page numbers if they're included. If it's a website, there are no page numbers. So that's it. We just have, in this case, the title. If you have a book or an ebook that has page numbers on it, like your textbook for a class, for instance, and you can see the page numbers on the page at the bottom, or a PDF ebook. If you have a PDF ebook and at the bottom, it says, for instance, page 47, then you would include the page number if there is a page number available. But if there is no page number and it's just text and paragraphs, you don't have to give paragraph numbers in MLA. APA is different, but in MLA, if there's a page number, give it. If there's no page number, don't. So since this is a website, this is all I can do. If it's a video, I don't have to give a timestamp or anything like that. Okay, it's page numbers or no page numbers. In this case, no page number. Now for the next one, we have, starting on the left, the word Frank. There is only one author, so that one's going to be easy. Let me take this with me right here. And it's not in quotes because it's a name, so I don't need the quotations for this one. Oops. So first thing on the left, Frank. Just one last name, Frank. If there are page numbers, let's say this was a scan of this book, the Oxford Art Journal, and I could see on the bottom of the page I use, it was page 67, then I would put 67. Okay, again, if there are page numbers you can see, then you will use them. If there are no page numbers, because this was just a text copy, it wasn't like a scanned copy, but it was just paragraphs on one long page in the website, if you will, in the database, and there are no page numbers, then I don't need that. But if there are page numbers I can see, then I'm going to provide them. Once again, this one is also easy because it's only one author. So starting on the left and working my way in. Whoops, here we go. Okay. Starting on the left, the first thing on the left is the name Hammond. There's no other authors, it's just Hammond. So that's super easy. Only one author. There we go. It's a page, it's a web page, so I don't have to provide a page number there. Okay. How about this one? There are two authors now. So the rule is, if there are two authors, you have to write them both. So we start on the left, we've got Zucker. Well, we're not going to put the first names, just last names. So if there's two authors, it's Zucker and the other last name is Harris. So we have to look inside that one to figure out what we put. In this case, it's Zucker is the first last name. We write the word and because there's two. And then the other last name is Harris. So we've got Zucker and Harris for our information. Now for the final one, we have that three or more example, right? It was Zucker, Harris, and Hammond, for instance. There were three. And so we abbreviated with this ETAL. So for the in-text citation, for this one, we are still going to start on the left. So we'll go Zucker, but then normally we would put all the names, but we have the abbreviation instead. So we have to include the abbreviation, include that abbreviation to show that there were multiple authors. So we keep it in. So it's Zucker et al., ETAL, which means and the rest is what that means. Okay? So if it's one author, you got one author's name. If it's two authors, you put both authors' names. If it's three or more, you would abbreviate in your works cited page, and then you abbreviate again in the in-text citation. Right? And then if it's no author, you just start with the left side of the title. Even if it starts with, for instance, let's say if this one was like the great artist Arnold Bachlin. Okay, you don't skip forward to where the name is or something like that. Again, you start on the left. Well, I can't just make it the, right? Even though it's the first word. The great what? That's not a phrase, right? The great artist. Oh, well, that's a noun. I can stop. The great artist. I don't need Arnold Bachlin, etc., etc. Again, like I said, 2 to 3 words will do it usually. In this case, I want to go to the first noun, person, place, or thing, or noun phrase. And in this case, I would stop at the word artist instead. Because if you just look at this, you can look down the left side and you can see where this would fall. Another note, when you're doing alphabetical order, the word the, okay, in fact, the words a, and the word the don't count alphabetically as the first part of the title. So if the word the is the first word, you actually alphabetize under the second word, in this case, G. So actually, if this were the title, I would need to move you alphabetically after Frank now. E, F, G, right? We ignore the word the. Okay? So that's just a quick run through of MLA, the works cited, and the in-text citations. So when you're doing an outline, for example, and you're writing content that you read into your outline in your own words, you then need to provide a citation with that content to show where you got it from. If you don't do that, you have plagiarized. And then on the works cited, or at the end of your outline, you will have these documentations, right? These works cited references, these documentations that are going to match your in-text citations in your outline. And that's how you properly make sure you've documented so you don't plagiarize while you are using MLA. This is what you have to do for all papers, okay? At least in the MLA style. Later on, when we do APA, we have to learn how to do that style. But for MLA, okay? But for MLA, this is what it looks like. And if you don't do these things when you're doing your college work, that can result in either deductions or even a big fat zero on an entire essay that you wrote. Like I said, it can be easy to make mistakes with these little things, which is why you need to give yourself enough time when you're doing your assignments to get that stuff checked by your teacher or by a tutor in the library. Okay? And one other note, obviously, don't highlight everything like I did here. That's just so you can see it. I just wanted to point it out to you. Okay? So you won't do any highlighting or anything like that. These are just the basics. It doesn't include things like paper formatting. That's really once you get to a rough draft. But this will get you started with your basic research and documentation for your outline assignments, and even when you start writing, to make sure that you've properly given credit.